All right, welcome in everyone. UGA Football Live with JC Shelton. We are here for a first week 7 episode. College football season really had an uptick last week, right? Most top 10 teams go down in 1 week, all by unranked opponents. What a crazy week in college football. Georgia, of course, got a win in the Deep South's oldest rivalry. If you missed it, we had our instant reactions on Saturday evening right after the game. We'll do the same this week after Mississippi State. That will be a 4:15 kick on SEC Network in Sanford Stadium, another home game for the Bulldogs, only their third of the season, but it's good to have another one back in Sanford. A couple of big things to hit on today. I know former Georgia tight end Arthur Lynch, my co-host this season, he is a healthy scratch again, folks, for this one. His schedule at school is getting really tough. You know, they've now graduated from ABCs. They are now in phonics. So that's what he's, that's a lot. That's a lot for anyone. Okay. So our thoughts and prayers with Artie. But he'll be back later this week for our second show of the week. But yeah, a couple of big nuggets to get to as far as news goes for Georgia. We'll start it out with the negative side of things. Woke up Tuesday morning and read the reports of Georgia receiver Colbie Young, transfer out of Miami, was arrested late on Wednesday night, or late on Monday night, early on Tuesday morning, for battery and assault of an unborn child. Read the police report. I'm not going to hash it all out here. It's out there if you want to read it. I know a lot of you probably have already read those details. But another hit, right? Another blow to Georgia off the field. And they keep coming. And we've talked about every single one of them on this show. And here we are again. And it's, as an alum, it's tough to see and have to talk about this all the time. I know Kirby Smart's about to speak with the media here this evening, talking to you on a Tuesday afternoon right now. Going to be talking to the media this evening and can only imagine what he feels about the situation. Just over and over again, having to defend his program and his players in front of public. And I just, you don't know exactly what happened, even with police reports, right? People lie on both sides of the aisle, right? There's situations where you can't know the full details of the situation right now, looking at it from the outside in. But it's interesting to me. I mean, just keep your hands off people. That would help a lot of things. And as Pops always said, anything after 11:59, nothing good happens. Okay, that was like a 12 a.m. situation, something like that, with his ex-girlfriend. It's weird. It's weird waking up having to see that, and because then you have to think about it from the football aspect, beyond the off-field stuff that Kirby Smart's going to have to defend here tonight. Interested in what he'll say, but it'll probably be the same thing along the lines of, "It's not what we condone." We talk about culture to these guys all the time, respect, dignity, playing for the G on your test, representing your state and your school on the field, but also as a young man in this program. But that's not exactly what the fruits of the labor are showing, right? On the outside, at least. And the majority of guys, you don't hear a stinking peep about them, but that's 7 arrests just this year for Georgia, and another transfer arrest, right? Because Trevor Etienne was arrested this summer. Now Colbie Young, and Ra Thomas was already dismissed from the team, another receiver and Mississippi State transfer. Of course, this was his second year with the program before his second domestic violence arrest, and he was ultimately dismissed here in the preseason. And that's what you kind of have to think about now. And that's kind of our job here, is to talk about football. And the program aside, which, outside looking in, it's not a good optic whatsoever. And the national media is also taking a hold of it, as they, should. I mean, this is the University of Georgia's 2 national championships. This is one of the most dominant programs in the country of the last 4 seasons. So anything like this is going to be taking over headlines. But that aside, we don't know, what this situation is going to be like with Colbie Young. Kirby Smart's not going to tell media anyway tonight what his plans are, or what the program's plans are for any punishment. You can expect that Georgia's going to let this play out with the legal process, and maybe hold him out indefinite suspension, something like that. It'd be my best guess, and that is complete 100% guess, folks, on that. Which I don't necessarily like guessing about these things, but I don't think it hurts anyone to guess, see what Georgia might do here. I think I would be surprised if he was dismissed just because it is the first situation. We don't know the details per se. They might let this one play out in the legal process. But let's assume that he does miss time or is dismissed. Let's just assume that for a second, kind of take that approach, which would be worst case scenario for Georgia's offense. Beyond it sounds like a mistake was made, obviously, and it's not a good one, especially with battery and assault of an unborn child like that on the police report. I mean, that's obviously not a good optic for anybody. No excuses, but you have to kind of tie this into what's Georgia going to look like offensively. And that's my biggest question because, you already lost a similar type, very physical receiver, wins jump balls, good hands, that kind of presence. You lost that with Rah-Rah, right? Colbie Young comes in, has his best game in a Georgia uniform against Auburn. He's fourth on the team in receiving, has 2 touchdowns on the year, which is second. Had his best game, led Georgia in receiving yards last week. And it looked like, and I tweeted about this, and we talked about it in our instant reactions after the game. I talked about how he is slowly becoming a focal point in this offense. He's playing more. He's getting more comfortable after coming over from Miami. And it's a big jump going from system to system and new coordinator, and you got new receivers coach and a quarterback, of course. It's a challenge for every transfer. And he's kind of come into his own. And, I thought from that perspective for Georgia, that was really good, right? Because you needed some playmakers, and Artie and I have talked about it. They got to have it guy. I think Colbie Young has shown that he can be that type of player. But now let's assume you lose him for a game or, a couple games or whatever it's going to be. Then you put Georgia into a situation again where you're kind of trying out things, different players and different looks to try to give that presence to opposing defenses to where if you man up on this guy, you're going to lose. And I don't see, Dylan Bell, Dominic Lovett, they've played well. I don't think they're those type of guys for the most part, which is going to win any man-on-man battle just because they're not that jump ball kind of guy. I'm not taking away from them, but having that physical presence that a Colbie Young, a 6'4" type of body gives, Georgia doesn't have that anymore without him. At the receiver position, at least. Oscar Delp, Lawson Lucky, those are bigger guys at tight end. So that's going to put more pressure on Dominic Lovett, Dylan Bell, Nitro Tuggle, Anthony Evans, trying out different sets and different players, see what they have, see what Georgia has here, because they need to prepare for these games they're going to get in to where a score needs to win it, right? And we kind of harp on these matchups, but, after this week, you go to Texas. Later in the year, you got Ole Miss and you got Tennessee, right? Those games could come down to a point where you have to go score points to keep up in it and put yourself in the right position to win it in the fourth quarter. So that's going to be the biggest question for me, assuming that Colbie Young does miss time or maybe he's kicked off the team, what have you, whatever happens, if he does miss snaps and he's not available for you. So that's the biggest thing for me, and I don't think it's going to rear its head this week as Georgia takes on Mississippi State in Athens, right? Mississippi State has a lot of issues, and we'll get into those a little bit here in a minute. Has a lot of issues, and I don't think Georgia is going to be hurt without Colbie Young this week. But the offense, I think, obviously, we saw that play out, against Kentucky and against Alabama. Now, in the second half, Alabama was a different story. Georgia really took advantage of the deep shots. I think Dominic Lovett, Dylan Bell, those guys really, really played well at their best, perhaps. But yeah, that's going to be the biggest question against really good competition and good SEC defenses, where it's like you can't run the ball at will. All right, so we got to win these matchups on the outside. We got to give receivers the best opportunity, according to their skill set, to provide us dividends on offense. So that's the biggest question there. It's going to be interesting for sure from now on, looking at that. But we'll move on to this one too. Kirby Smart on Sanford and the crowd and the atmosphere of Dooley Field at Sanford Stadium. I'm sure you've read or watched the video of Kirby Smart talk about this, but here is him after the game. To be honest, I'm a little disappointed. I'm probably disappointed in our fans for the first time. I thought there was really a lack of affecting the game, crowd noise-wise, with passion and energy. He's talking about Georgia-Auburn, Deep South's oldest rivalry, right? he doubles down on his comments on Monday. I said what I said, and I stand on what I said, and I feel that it could have been better. But my job is to coach the football team, and I'm going to do the best I can in my power. So he's not backing down from this, and I don't think he should. I think there's two sets from what I'm gathering from the fan base. There's kind of two opposing views here. It is one, yes, Kirby Smart needs to bring this up because the effort from the crowd is lacking. Two, it is Sanford Stadium and the game day process is not what it should be comparative to the SEC stadiums around the country that really take advantage of the environment to the fullest, whether it be certain type of music, certain type of music played in certain times. I mean, Georgia trotting out an environmental sciences teacher to give them a round of applause when it's a tie ball game or a close ball game and you want noise. When the TV timeout stops. In my opinion on this is, and as an alum, graduating 21, at that time we were still fiending for a national championship. The fan base, and if you spent a lot of money to go there, if you weren't a student, if you spent a lot of money to go there, didn't matter. Of course, you have your boosters and your season ticket holders who have been to 30 games or 30 years rather. And those aren't going to be your stand up and leave without a voice after the game. But it was kind of our selective group, and I feel like a lot of the fan base at that time, especially student wise, was if you leave this game without a voice, don't come back. And that's the kind of mentality you need as an SEC football fan. That's what makes this one of the things that makes this conference great is the fan base knows how important it can be in a game, right? In the best environments of college football, that's always a consistent theme. And I think Georgia does have that when it is a game that has that energy heading into it, and a few that come to mind that I was at in a really close proximity was, Kentucky in 21, Arkansas in 21. You can even go back to LSU and Aaron Murray and Zach Mettenberger. Those games stand out in my mind. Tennessee a couple of years ago. It's like, those games were, almost the highest level of Sanford environment, affect the game, crowd noise type you can get. And I think there is a large part of this fan base that has gotten too comfortable with winning to where if Georgia's not blowing somebody out, they're not going to be, they're going to be sitting on their tail waiting for, where are the big plays, where are the interceptions, the forced fumbles, defensive touchdowns, special teams plays, all that good stuff. And I just don't see it that way. I don't see it that way. I think it should always be that way. And, I saw the pictures too of the student overflow on the top level that was half empty by the third quarter in the 14-10 game against Auburn. And that's just, I mean, if you can't go to a game and stay the whole time without having to go downtown just after the second half because whatever you want to do, that's just sad to me. It's absolutely sad. I mean, you only get a few home games a year. That's what makes college football so great. People, they blueprint their entire fall for these games. That's how important it is. And I think, a large part of this fan base has gotten way too comfortable with that. Way too comfortable with the winning and the blowouts and such. So I think it's a needed comment by Kirby Smart. I really do. And I think Georgia's definitely, I think the fan base and they're definitely going to have a different type of environment against Mississippi State, even if it is the Bulldogs from Starkville and one of the worst teams in the SEC, might be the worst team in the SEC. I think that Georgia's crowd is going to really respond this week, but also in the big games, against Tennessee, especially in the latter part of the year, that's going to be a crazy environment. I think it's on kind of the head coach's shoulders. We've seen it before. I mean, Nick Saban called out his crowd at Alabama all the time, especially at the latter part of his career when they were, so used to winning. I think it's needed. I think it's a needed reminder that not only do we need you, but you can affect the game with noise in certain areas and in certain parts of the game. So I think it's needed for him. I don't have any problems with it. I know some people do, but I think there are, on the other side of it, I do agree with the fact that there are some changes you can bring to Sanford Stadium, whether it be music at certain times, whether it be maybe holding off on the introduce the economics, environmental science professor right when you're about to have a goal line stand, something like that. So there's changes can be made, of course, and I think they will eventually. But I think it's up to Georgia's crowd right now to answer in kind to Kirby's comments. Move on to some injury updates, and we'll get into a few things from this Auburn game and on to Mississippi State. And we're also going to talk some college football chaos at the end. We'll wrap it up there. Injury updates. So Smile Mondon missed Auburn. He's hopeful. Still don't know what's his injury is. Still don't know. He's hopeful. We have the hopeful Kirby Smart quote hand quotes on these. Tate Ratledge is going to be out. Expected to return around Florida with the ankle and the MCL. Roger Robinson, haven't heard anything new on him. He still has the toe. Underwent surgery in the preseason. He's out. London Humphreys, he did play. He was initially out last week on the first availability report. Upgraded to probable end up playing. And I think that's really good for him to get London Humphreys back in this lineup, man, because you're going to need him more depending on what happens with Colbie Young. Jared Wilson, center, missed Auburn. Could have played, per Kirby, is like an emergency center, quote. He's hopeful to go this week. It sounds like he would be able to if he was able to come in as an emergency guy, unless, knock on wood, he aggravates anything. That foot, I believe, this week. I'll take this time to shout out to Drew Bobo, because Drew Bobo came in, Mike Bobo's son, offense coordinator, came in at center and played really well. I mean, of course, there were some plays here and that their offensive line allowed a couple sacks there. Didn't have great communication, but the vast majority of that game, Georgia played well up front, and Drew Bobo, and it wasn't it wasn't like I'm watching this offense and be like, man, there was a piece missing up front, right, and especially in the middle, because I feel like that is that one position at center. If you have play that is below average or not up to your standard as far as what you want to get done offensively, it's so noticeable, right? And I think Drew Bobo played really well. And I know Dylan Fairchild was giving him shout outs, and even Jerry Wilson was giving him shout outs as well after the game for stepping up when they needed him. So that's good for Georgia because they didn't really have anybody behind Jared Wilson. Tate Ratledge took some snaps there at center in the preseason and in practice. But I think it's good for Georgia overall to have a guy like Drew Bobo come in as well if Jared aggravates anything this season. Jordan Hall has the stretch fractures in both legs in the preseason. He was questionable, didn't play. Kirby Smart gave another hopeful for him. We probably will find out more tonight, and then the SEC's availability report will come out on Wednesday. So just things to keep mindful of. Again, I don't think Georgia this week per se is going to fold if any of these guys don't play. I don't think that at all. Right? It's more about the remainder of the season, especially next week, traveling to Austin for a huge game with a lot of impactful situations that could come out of that game, depending on a win or loss. We'll talk a minute about Auburn here. I know if you missed our instant reactions, go more in a deep dive there. But I do want to point out a few things to kind of sum this game up a little bit before we move on to Mississippi State and talk some key players and such. 31-13. Artie, 35-7. That was his prediction. Mine was 34-9. We kind of got back on track on here. I think Georgia played up to its potential here. And, I read an ESPN report that was basically, it was like a snoozer of a game. Well, that's a good thing in the SEC. That's a good thing. And anytime you beat somebody by 18 points, right, and especially a conference rival like that, teams have been meeting since 1892. And we all know this game has been really, really weird in years past. You never know what's going to happen. People play up, people play down, mistakes. It's a rivalry game. I think Georgia overall, it's a good day to beat a dog, right? Georgia outgained Auburn 381-337, 4-4 in the red zone, 31-28 of possession time, 3 sacks, 5 tackles for loss. So what does that tell you? It tells you that Georgia controlled the game up front, offense and defense, good in the red zone. Like I said, there were sacks that were just bad communication on offensive line against a 3-man front, 3-man rush. Carson Beck missed some throws. He hit some really big-time throws there in the second half to really control the game and kind of put the foot on Auburn's throat to really kind of stop any comeback attempt. Defensively, the QB run hurt Georgia a few times. Not near as bad as it did last year in Jordan Hare. Remember, Peyton Thorne had 92 yards rushing and 93 yards rushing last year, like 28 this week, I think it was. So good for Georgia there. Turnovers wise, that was a weird thing for me though, because we talked so much about Auburn's turnovers. One of the worst teams in the country in turnovers, didn't turn the ball over. It's one of those things. I don't know if it was something Georgia was doing or Peyton Thorne just played better, because I do think Thorne has played maybe his two best games against Georgia the last 2 years. Player of the game here, and we'll focus on this for a minute, Trevor Etienne. So, and I tweeted out too, and I was just tongue-in-cheek a little bit, Georgia's offensive game plan, Trevor Etienne. Because that's, 16 carries, 88 yards, 2 touchdowns. Also has 6 catches, 42 yards after the catch. And we talked about, Georgia using him in the pass game a little bit more this year, as far as, in the running backs they did last year with Kendall Milton, Dejon Edwards. They tried to use Edwards a lot. I don't think it was a huge impact on that offensive performance. Georgia was so much better down the field and in between the tackles, but I think that's a huge part of this offense that can really help, and especially with the receiver questions that we've already talked about at length. That could be a kind of added wrinkle here, and I think Georgia took advantage of that, putting ETN on linebackers, right? Putting out in space, and get your best player the ball. Give your best player with the rock in his hands the ball, because through the first part of the season, Trevor Etienne is the best offensive player Georgia has with the hands, with the ball in his hands. So get it to him as much as possible. And then Nate Frazier too. I want to mention Nate Frazier. We talked about him in our instant reactions. He has a different type of burst. Now the issue holding him back is pass pro. And Kirby Smart's talked about it. It's a freshman running back situation where they come in, they don't have to do these things in high school. Come in, and then that is such an important part in the SEC against these really, really good front sevens and these different blitz packages that teams provide. You have to be on the same page with quarterback, offensive line as far as blitz pickup. That's why Cass Jones plays a good bit. He's so good at that. I think Nate Frazier, as he gets better at that, we're going to see him more. And he has a different burst. He's kind of like ETN, where you can just ball in his hands, different type of burst. North and south. Mace Guys Miss also can run through some tackles. So he's a young kid. There's still plenty of career for him left. But I think he could be a useful part here for Georgia. And I think if you're not seeing that when you're watching these games, I'm not sure what you're watching. Let's get in Mississippi State. So, two last met in 2022, 45-19 win by Georgia. Easy money. Jeff Lebby leads the Bulldogs from Starkville here. Former OU coordinator, first year at the helm here in Starkville. Definition of a rebuilding program, really, right? And that's expected. New staff. They lost one of the best passers in SEC history in Will Rogers. They've lost 4 straight: Texas, Florida, Toledo, and Arizona State. I will say, after that 41-17 loss to Toledo, they did play better against Florida. I think it was 45-28 game. And then Texas, I think it was a 34-13, something like that last week. So I think the player, they're growing. You can tell, right? But I think probably the biggest thing holding them back really is, the starting QB is out for the season. He went out in week 3. They have a true freshman here at quarterback, Michael Van Buren. 2 starts now. He's yet to throw a touchdown. He's a good athlete. He can run, but Mississippi State really can't block that well. It's going to be a problem against that Georgia front too, which is getting healthier. Mississippi State is 130th in sacks with 20. 130 out of 133 FBS teams. That's kind of the issues with them, right? And obviously, you have a freshman at quarterback too. They're going to hold the ball longer than they should as well, and that kind of plays a part into it. But their main issues are up front. So what they're going to do, they're going to use their running game, right? They have a good back in Johnny Daniels. I like him on tape. He's a stout SEC running back. 47 carries, 233, 5 yards per carry. He's got a touchdown too. They're really going to lean on that. They're going to try to minimize their issues on the offensive line. And they did that pretty well in the first half against Texas last week, to be honest with you. They kept Texas to 14 points on offense in the first half. They trailed 14-6 before UT went off in the second. But, if they can do that, that's what their MO is, right? And as a rebuilding program that, has issues up front in pass protection, they not have a guy out wide that's going to win every man-on-man matchup or anything like that of that sort, and a QB with very, very limited experience. They're trying to lean on that run game. Put up 150 yards rushing on Texas. Time of possession, they won 34-25. That's the type of game they want to have against Georgia. It is try to minimize anything Georgia does on offense, right? Try to get Carson Beck off the field as quick as possible, and then keep him off the field. Use that run game, long drives, right? The less opportunities Carson Beck has, the better for Mississippi State, and that's what they're going to try to do. Question is, can they do it? Georgia's been better against the run here last couple weeks, last couple games, I should say. They've only forced just 4 turnovers this year. 82nd ranked scoring offense at 27.4 points per game, 109th in scoring defense, 31.6. What am I missing here? Really, their only threat out wide is Kevin Coleman Jr. leads the receiving core, 28 catches, 344, and 3 touchdowns. Defensively, and that's where they had a lot of issues. You're talking about offensive line play and then defensive issues here. Isaac Smith leads the team in tackles. He's a safety, not exactly who you want to have leading your team in tackles. It means a lot of plays are getting past that second line of defenders. This game for Georgia, it's potential trap, right? Let's talk through this. So a trap game, either after a very, very highly anticipated matchup, high energy, maybe a close finish, a long game, i.e. Bama Vanderbilt. i.e. Bama Vanderbilt after Bama beat Georgia. Or ahead of a similar game. So Georgia has Texas next week, Mississippi State here. I think you should be a tad worried just because of how competitive college football is this year, and especially in the SEC. And if you watched last week's slate, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But I will say this is at home. This is in Sanford. Kirby Smart has challenged these fans too. I think the environment's going to be better. Yeah, I don't think this is a trap game for Georgia, right? We've seen it in the past. It could be like this, but I don't think it is. I think Georgia should be worried this week. With that said, but you need really good execution. I think you need to work out some things offensively as far as getting off a little bit faster in the first half. Execution. And I don't mean necessarily score 28 points in the first half. I just mean execution on third down, which Georgia did much, much better last week. I think they were over 50%, if I remember correctly, the numbers on third down against Auburn when they were like 33% for the year, which is, after being the best team over on the country last year in that metric, hasn't been up to snuff this year. So that's a good sign. That's where you want to be. You want to execute well, third down, execute well in the red zone, right? No turnovers, and then try to get some defensively and just wreak havoc, right? Get them off the field. Those things doesn't have to necessarily lead to 38 points or whatever you want in the first half, but it's those things you want to get cleaned up here as the season grows, and that's usually where Kirby Smart Georgia teams get better at is execution, limiting turnovers, penalties, making big plays when needed. So that's what you want to see if you're a Georgia fan this week. I know it's not the type of opponent that Georgia fans necessarily want to see, but that is coming soon, absolutely soon. The spread right now, Georgia's 34-point favorites. 34-point favorites, 53.5 is the total. We're not going to make a prediction here. We'll do it on our second show, which should come Thursday or Friday. You will know, of course. So keep an eye on that. We'll make our picks then. Let's move on a little bit of college football now. Little college football to wrap up the show. We talked about the upsets. Down goes Bama. That was an incredible game. And if you did get to watch our instant reactions, I was watching it just like the rest of everyone who tuned in to me yappering about Georgia Auburn. Incredible game. We had it on when Georgia was playing Auburn, and I just kept thinking to myself, Bama's going to come back, right? Jalen Milroe, Ryan Williams are going to score 48 in the second half, and we're not going to see an upset like this. Vanderbilt led the entire game. That was one of the most surprising stats to me. Vanderbilt led the entire game. After that pick six, is all Vanderbilt, right? I know Alabama came up close late, and then boom, Vanderbilt, Diego Pavia. He's got like Johnny Manziel trick right now to fame. NIL money coming in. I mean, the kid is electric though. Absolutely. Option attack. Bama just was so undisciplined on defense. So undisciplined. They were, predictable on they ran the same defense that, Georgia lit them up for, which is that cover one. They weren't disguising looks, it appeared. So, I mean, Vanderbilt, everything played kind of into their favor that game, and props to them. Absolutely. What a game. So, Bama's down. We'll talk about how this kind of matters in SEC standings here in a second. Tennessee goes down. I liked Arkansas to cover in that game. I don't think I was thinking upset. I thought they might give them a run for their money there late, but I just kind of trusted Nico and that Heupel offense to make some plays when needed there in the second half, and I really like their defense. But Arkansas, we talked about it on the show. It's like one of the most entertaining teams in the country this season, and the Fighting Sam Pittmans, right, and Bobby Petrino's getting it done in Arkansas, and it was one of those things where, and I read this stat too, and this is really interesting. It's like when Tennessee plays odd fronts, they have a losing record. And they're scoring like 19 points per game against teams that play odd fronts. Georgia is one of them, and Arkansas was one of them. And it feels like the offense kind of gets predictable against those fronts, is what I'm reading. So it'd be really interesting to see what they do if they adjust when they play Bama and they play Georgia this year. Missouri and Michigan both go down. Missouri, I felt in a different way because you have Brady Cook, you have Luther Burden, you have well-coached offensive and defensive lines, you have a well-coached secondary. I mean, that's what Missouri's played good defense. They've played electric offense last couple of seasons. And that game was just, I mean, they had some touchdowns called back. Well, a touchdown specifically called back, some other big plays called back in that game in the first half, which really put it out of reach the way they were playing offense and defense. I didn't think Texas A&M. It's clear to me that Texas A&M is getting better throughout the season. Connor Weigman, I don't know if we like Connor Weigman after this. I didn't like him headed into the game. I know he was hurt a couple of weeks there and he comes back. I remember watching closely that game against Notre Dame earlier in the season. But maybe this could be one of those things where it's like team grows, right? A player grows. He's seeing things more clearly because he stares down at receivers to me still. He's making throws without even looking at the coverage, throwing right into arms of guys. That's what I saw early in the season, but that could have changed now. Either Missouri is just full of issues enough to where he's able to take advantage there, or Texas A&M is getting better with a lot of talent. Sure, new staff. So we'll see. But it is interesting. We'll talk about SEC race here in a sec. Miami also should have lost. They should have lost. That's two questionable calls in 2 weeks in a row that somehow, I mean, this is a game of 60 minutes, 100 plays. And there's two calls you can point to in 2 consecutive weeks that give at Miami the win. As a 25, they were down 25 at Cal. They stormed back. Credit due there. Cam Warden out of my offense. Credit there. But then a clear targeting call forced Cal into a punt, and then Miami goes off, game-winning drive, wins it. I mean, without that, it's first down Cal in opponent territory. You run out the clock or score again, right? And then the week prior, Virginia Tech, the Hail Mary, which I don't know how you have enough video evidence to overturn that. It looked like a touchdown to me. You called it on the field. How can you return it? And that's, that gives them the win in that game. So I don't trust Miami, that's for sure. I think defensively they have a lot of issues, and they haven't really played good opponents yet. That's the thing. And they move up in the AP poll, which is why I hate the AP poll, to be honest with you. And Georgia's number 5, by the way. I mean, who cares? Who cares? You shouldn't. But yeah, Miami, don't trust them. We'll talk SEC. So only 3 SEC teams remain undefeated in conference play. You got Texas, you got A&M, and LSU. Alabama, we'll talk about them here because we're talking about SEC race. They have a win over Georgia. Alabama has Tennessee, Missouri, and OU left. Texas has OU, Georgia, Arkansas, Kentucky, and A&M. I think each and every one of those teams give Texas a game. I think Georgia can beat them. LSU has Ole Miss, Arkansas, A&M, Bama, and OU. It's a tough schedule for them right there. Tough schedule, especially this week with Ole Miss. And that Ole Miss team, and I expected them to cover against South Carolina. I think it was, 10 points? I liked Ole Miss to cover. I think, because, South Carolina, what's the best aspect of that South Carolina team? Defensive line, right? And when you have a really, really good coordinator with offensive talent that complements, you can take advantage of a team that has one glowing area. They're going to take away what you do best, and that's exactly what Ole Miss did. Just domination from start to finish there. I like Ole Miss against LSU. But LSU also has Ark, A&M, Bama, and OU. I see multiple losses there, at the very least 2. Ole Miss has LSU, OU, Arkansas, Georgia. Ole Miss is kind of an up and down team, right? So I think they're getting up for these big games, maybe down from the other ones. Oklahoma, Arkansas, that's going to be a tough little slate there with some teams who fight really hard. Oklahoma's defense is really stout. Arkansas, we saw what they did against Tennessee, and then, of course, Georgia. A&M has LSU, South Carolina, and Texas. A&M definitely has the easiest schedule out of the bunch. Absolutely. So there's a real opportunity. There's a real chance that they're playing in Atlanta, which is crazy to think after watching that Notre Dame game early in the season. But that's where we're at. That's why, this college football season, we kind of talked about it before the season. It's like probably the craziest SEC season, but also college football season, because you look at the ACC, you got Miami, sure, but Clemson, they're my pick. They've been my pick since preseason to win the ACC. I doubled down after they got trounced by Georgia. They definitely look like the best team in the ACC. Now, the AP poll is not going to tell you that. But Miami, Clemson, that's one thing they're not going to do is allow 38 points to Cal. And you talk about that Miami defense. I think that's Clemson's game all day. Big 12, that's wide open, right? Texas Tech, Iowa State, BYU, Colorado, West Virginia, they're all tied in that conference. So there's going to be teams beating up on each other. We'll get somebody to clear out that race here at the end of the season. But it'll be really interesting because, like I said, the automatic bids, baby. Big 12, ACC, SEC, automatic bids. Big 10-wise, Ohio State, right? Number 2, plays Oregon, at Oregon this weekend. Biggest game, second biggest game of the season behind Georgia. Bama plays Oregon, Dan Lanning, Ryan Day, Chip Kelly. Could be a really, really good game. Both of those teams have played absolutely no one to this point. Absolutely no one. So what do they look like against better competition? That's the biggest question. I'll be watching. Nebraska, Penn State, right? Ohio State at Oregon versus Nebraska at Penn State over the next 3 weeks. So we're going to find out a lot about the Buckeyes over the next 3 weeks. Group of 5 wise, right? Automatic bid as well. Well, not automatic. Well, yeah, they do. Highest ranked group of 5 champion gets into the playoff. Boise State. They've really separated themselves from the pack. Ashon Genty, the running back, he's in the Heisman Trophy conversation for a good reason. He should be leading, in my opinion. The statistical run he is on is that of Barry Sanders. I don't care what league you play in. It's college football, right? Even if you're Boise State, that's incredible what he's doing right now. So it's clear to me Boise State is the front runner, especially. So all these things are going to this college football playoff, the expanded 12-team format. It's going to be a crazy, crazy, crazy finish, and we'll be here with you throughout the entire thing. So it's going to be a good slate this week. Georgia, Mississippi State, 4:15 kicks on SEC Network. So make sure you know where to find that if you're watching from home. It's always a little weird when Georgia's not playing on ESPN. But SEC Network is where you can find them. And then after Mississippi State is Texas week, right? So you want to see, if you're a Georgia fan, good execution, especially. And we'll talk about it again in a couple of days here on Thursday. We'll have Arthur Lynch in. We'll have a special guest, former Georgia Bulldog, another one as well. And then we'll have our instant reactions after the Dogs versus the Bulldogs here in Sanford Stadium. So until next time, appreciate you watching, listening, streaming, wherever you're getting it. X, Facebook, YouTube. If you're listening wherever you get your podcast, we really appreciate you. Absolutely. Drop anything you want me to read in the comments. Shoot me an email. Love to hear it. Love to hear some feedback. And also, if you want to get featured on the show, don't hesitate to send us something good. I appreciate you. Till next time.